was not involved in any way. As a matter of fact, he was standing on the first floor watching the parade.
Using unprecedented modern-day digital computer technology, Larry Rivera presents scientific evidence which in any court of law would exonerate Lee Oswald of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Rivera meticulously takes the reader through the intricacies of digital overlays which prove that Lee was standing in the book depository doorway while the assassination was taking place, that the backyard photos were cleverly manufactured to frame him, and how the 3D program Blender can recreate Dealey Plaza was on 22 November 1963, so we can finally determine where JFK was really shot that fateful day. As if this were not enough, Rivera reveals what really happened on Elm Street as recently transcribed interviews with the motorcycle escort officers who were closest to JFK that day describe a heretofore unknown version of the events that shook our nation to its core and affected the history of the world forever. Don't miss it.
Hi, this is Gary King. If you're interested in the book, then go to PatriotRadioBooks.com. That's PatriotRadioBooks.com.
All right, welcome to the Jfk Show number 234. We have a special guest tonight, David Knight, and he's going to be knighted as our guide and, I guess, researcher and videographer. So anyway, David, go ahead and take the show. I understand this is a presentation that you recently gave in Illinois.
Yeah, it sure is. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight, and thank you, Jim and Gary and Larry, for having me on your show. It's a real honor.
Hey, well, we're very pleased to have you here, David. And we've heard.
I'm sorry, Jim. I didn't want to go ahead.
Go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, no, I'm very honored to bring David, into the fold here, as a contributor to our show, which has been going on for so many years now. It seems like forever, yeah. And it's not, we can't call it the new JFK show anymore, Jim. It's like, we gotta change the name a little bit. But anyway,
it's a search engine thing.
Yeah, last time.
Well, it's the show that's doing the cutting edge. So what we're doing is new. So I think it's fine. We can stay with it.
New research comes from here.
Right.
So anyway, I just want to segue to David's presentation by saying that we presented my blog post in our last show, and I presented a lot of the stuff that Dave is going to present here tonight. But I wanted Dave to do his original presentation, the one that he did at the Olney conference for the JFK historical group. All right, and which I thought was magnificent. And I want to say that David Denton was very astute in bringing the first three presenters back to back on that morning of Friday. Okay, he brought David, he brought Casey. Casey was like, he just, that was unbelievable. And Brian, yeah, and it was new stuff. A lot of the stuff that these guys presented, and they all worked together, and that's why I thought that we should give each of them some time on successive weeks so that they can come in and present it, and we can bring about their work so others can see it and give them more exposure the way that they are also going to give us exposure. And I think reciprocating like that is the right thing to do. Go ahead, Dave. Take it away.
Okay, here we go. I get asked the question, so who do you think killed JFK? My answer is always the same. It doesn't matter what I think, it only matters what you think. I can give you the roadmap, but it's up to you to strap in and drive. And I hope after today you'll do just that.
Wow, you make history come alive.
Thanks, Ted. We're going to make history come alive today. Quick word of thanks before I start my presentation. I do want to thank Casey Quinlan for being the first person to open my mind in 1989. The moment he walked across the stage and threw my school history book in the trash can, I actually started paying attention. Mom and Dad for buying all my first research materials. Brian Edwards, of course, for his help and guidance, and someone that I've been able to research with and bounce ideas and theories off of. and also all the eyewitnesses, researchers, and individuals that I've been fortunate enough to interview and speak with over the years. A little bit about my background. I've been a researcher since 1989. I've read over 400 books. I've read thousands of documents. I've viewed almost every film available. I've interviewed hundreds of eyewitnesses and people involved in and around the research community. Returned to the scene of the crime over 20 times, made 11 documentaries released on DVD and Blu-ray. Been a collaborator of other researchers and authors' works, including William Law. Been part of the National Conference in Dallas for the last 9 years as a videographer and producer of the conference DVD films, about 200 of them. I'm also a researcher, lecturer, and I'm writing a book that will soon be published. And our topic today is a new theory on the throat wound of President Kennedy, possible weapon, ammunition, shooter location, and why. So where did my info come from? Came from books, videos, testimony, internet, documents, and my direct interviews. So let us begin. We will discuss the weapons that were known for a fact that were in Dealey Plaza on 11/22/63. We will discuss the weapons in question that could have been in Dealey Plaza on 11/22/63, and we will discuss what I theorize is the type of weapon that could have been the cause of JFK's throat wound. So let's look at the evidence and my theory. We clearly see JFK's been hit in the throat. Governor Connolly shows no sign of being shot in the Zapruder frame 230. In the Alkins photograph, I'll give you a little bit of background here. James Williams Alkins took his two famous photographs on November the 22nd, 1963, while working on assignment for the AP. He was supposed to work in the office that day, but instead went to Dealey Plaza with his own camera and captured these two photos known as Alkins 6 on the left and Alkins 7 on the right. And we see a blow up here. JFK's already reacting to being shot in the throat. Let's look at the picture of the hole in the crack in the windshield. We see the hole in the windshield, and several eyewitnesses stated the fact that the size of the hole in the windshield was about the size of a number 2 pencil.
Yeah, but David, right there, that's the Secret Service. That's a fake windshield that was presented after it. Okay, go ahead.
I'm good with that. Eyewitnesses say they saw the hole in the windshield and the size of the hole would fit a number 2 pencil. They also said it was a hole made from the outside going to the inside. Dr. Evela Glanges, but it was very clear it was through and through bullet hole through the windshield of the car from the front to the back. No way there's even any cracks associated with that bullet hole. It seems like a high velocity bullet that had penetrated from the front to the back in the glass pane. George Whitaker Sr. says it was a good clean bullet hole through the screen from the front right. This had a clean round hole in the front and fragmentation out the back. Statements from the men who killed Kennedy. Dallas Motorcycle Patrolman Stavis Ellis, there was a hole in the left front windshield. It was a hole you could put a pencil through it. You could take a regular standard writing pencil, stick it right through there. Dallas Motorcycle Patrolman H.R. Freeman, I was right beside it. I could have touched it. It was a bullet hole. You could tell what it was. Secret Service Agent Charles Taylor Jr. In addition, of particular note was a small hole just left of center in the windshield from what appeared to be bullet fragments were removed. These are from David Lifton's book of Best Evidence. So eyewitnesses and ear witnesses have spoken and testified what they thought they heard was not gunshots. They thought they heard firecrackers going off. Well, what kind of gun or rifle sounds like a firecracker? I will answer this question with my theory later on. Firecracker. Sounded like a firecracker. These 50 names on this list, count them, 50 ear witnesses heard what they thought to be a firecracker, such as Jim Darnell, Roy Truley, Jay Malkins, Tom Dillard, Mary Moorman, and so on and so forth. So what did the doctors at Parkland remember seeing concerning the wound in the throat of President Kennedy? And what did the doctors see of the wound at Bethesda Naval Hospital? At Parkland, they saw a perfect round hole, entry wound. Bethesda, they saw a 3-inch gash, exit wound. Comparison, Parkland's on the left and the Warren Commission drawing is on the right. The back wound, Parkland doctors didn't see this wound, but during the autopsy, the wound in the back was found and probed. Doctors probed the wound and stated they could feel the end of the wound with their fingers, so not a very deep wound, surely not a through and through wound. The Warren Commission would have us believe that Oswald shot from an elevated 6th floor, shooting at a downward angle, shot JFK, and the wound turned upright in his body and exited his throat. And how do they explain this theory? With the magic bullet theory. 7 wounds, 2 people. This is the picture of the HSCA JFK executive with the magic bullet on the left, cotton wadding in the middle to the left, goat carcass breaking 1 bone, and then the wrist bone of a human cadaver. So we have 1 bullet that caused all those wounds but came out looking like CE 399. And you know what I call this? It's bullshit. Statements from doctors at Parkland Hospital. Dr. Malcolm Perry, Dr. Charles Crenshaw, and Dr. Robert McClellan. I'm going to show a couple quick video clips of Malcolm Perry and Charles Crenshaw, and then I'll tell you what Robert McClellan told me.
At Parkland, Dr. Malcolm Perry, attending surgeon, tried desperately to keep the president alive, but the very urgency of that problem prevented him from examining the two wounds, as he now explains in his first public statement since the report was published.
I noted a wound when I came into the room, which was of the right posterior portion of the head. Of course, I did not examine it. Again, there was no time for cursory examinations, and if a patent airway could not be secured and the bleeding could not be controlled, it really made very little difference. Some things must take precedence and priority, and in this instance, the airway and the bleeding must be controlled initially.
What about this wound that you observed in the front of the president's neck? Would you tell me about that?
Yes, of course, it was a very cursory examination. The emergency proceedings at hand necessitated immediate action. There was not time to do more than an extremely light examination.
Did it occur to you at the time, or did you think, was this an entry wound or was this an exit wound?
Actually, I didn't really give it much thought, and I realized that perhaps it would have been better had I have done so. But I actually applied my energies, and those of us there all did, to the problem at hand, and I didn't really concern myself too much with how it happened or why. And for that reason, of course, I didn't think about cutting through the wound, which, of course, rendered it inviolate for as regards further examination and inspection. But it didn't even occur to me. I did what was expedient and what was necessary, and I didn't think much about it.
The nature of the throat wound can no longer be verified, for no records were made and no pictures taken before Dr. Perry cut through it in an attempt to relieve his patient's breathing. The doctors at Parkland were engaged in a desperate struggle to keep the president alive. All else was secondary. But their task was impossible. One of the shots had virtually destroyed the president's head. Even as the doctors worked, the president died. At the hospital, the scene was turbulent and disordered. The press and public were clamoring for news. Dr. Perry was rushed from the emergency room to a news conference where he was badgered into giving a description of the wounds. The neck wound, he told the press, looked like an entry wound, and he pointed to the front of his neck. In the transcript of that news conference, there's no doubt that Dr. Perry made it sound as if he had a firm opinion.
The second wound?
The second wound was here in the throat, right above the necktie. It was a small opening, very small, 3 to 5 millimeters, about the size of your little finger.
In a slow-motion study of the film, President Kennedy grabs his throat with both hands, reacting, Crenshaw believes, as if he is shot from the front. At first, most of the doctors working on the president believed the small neck wound they observed to be an entry wound from the front. Compounding the mystery is this photograph of the government's autopsy, showing a gaping wound in the president's neck. A tracheostomy incision was done at Parkland over the site of the bullet wound. Crenshaw says someone tampered with that wound after he last saw Kennedy's body, making it larger to resemble a bullet exit wound.
Look, this is the size of the tracheostomy tube. Incision was made and then placed in. This large part, this flange, stays outside.
So it was a small wound, about the size of the instrument that you
Right.
saw.
An inch to an inch and a half, maximum. This wound, and described in the Warren Commission, was almost 3 inches wide.
Double the size.
Double.
Is it possible that the doctor working to put this in what may have been already a bullet wound made the incision too large?
Oh, no. No, Perry was an artist with the blade. He was one of the best trained technical surgeons.
And here's what Dr. Robert McClellan stated about the throat wound. I've had the pleasure of knowing Dr. McClellan for the last 10 years. I've seen him lecture, and I've recorded him in lecture, and I spoke with him at great length. He's been very adamant since 1963 about what he witnessed inside Trauma Room 1 at Parkland Hospital, Dallas, Texas. He states that he saw the back of the president's head blasted out. I asked him back in 2014 about the throat wound, and what he told me is that it appeared to be an entry wound. When I asked him about the size of the wound, and it brought up what I read about what the other doctors had said about it being between 3 and 5 millimeter, I asked him what he had observed. Dr. McClellan states that he arrived after the tracheotomy had been performed, but that he was recalling what he and his fellow doctors discussed about the size. He told me that he felt it was a little larger than 5 millimeters, but definitely smaller than 6.5, which was the size of the ammunition used in a 6.5 Mannlicher Carcano rifle. I pressed further, how much bigger? And he told me just a little bigger than 5 millimeters, but definitely smaller than 6 millimeters.
David, I think that is a great find, a great relationship that you had with Dr. McClellan, and that you were very fortunate to talk to him, so many times about this. That's one of the things about what I've said many times about talking to actual witnesses and getting the story from people that were there.
Absolutely, Larry, absolutely. So remember, we are looking for a round of ammunition that's between 3 to 6 millimeters and the weapon that could have been used. Well, let's look at the types of ammunition. And on this chart, I want to make a note here. The .17 HMR round at the far left with the X over it was not available in 1963. It wasn't produced until 2002. So what we're looking at is the .22 Hornet or the .22 Long Rifle. So let's look at the handguns, rifles, and shotguns that we see pictured in photographs taken on November 22nd, 63 in Dealey Plaza. Dallas Police Department, they were carrying Remington 870 shotguns. We see several photographs here of Dallas PD with shotguns in their hands. Shotgun ammo does not explain the hole in President Kennedy's throat. We see rifles being carried into and out of the TSBD, while they carry Remington Model 8s. In the photographs just shown, we see Captain Fritz and Detective Boyd carrying their Remington Model 8 rifles in and out of the Texas School Book Depository building. Well, that rifle was chambered in .25, .30, .32, .35, and 300 Savage. All the sizes on the bottom, from 6.54 all the way to 9.1, is definitely bigger than the diameter of 3 to 6 millimeters. Author researcher Brian Edwards sums up the description of these rifles better than anyone that I know, so thanks to Brian. Captain Fritz and Detective Boyd both carry Remington automatic rifles, same model and caliber used by Clyde Barrow. This rifle is a superior weapon if you're hunting boars and bears. It's ludicrous to carry that into a building. If they would have had to fire it inside, it would go through everyone and hit the brick wall. I never did understand why they would carry rifles in there anyway. Patrol was already in there searching. So the size of those bullets, 6.54, 7.8, 8.2, and 9.1 is too big for the throat wound, so let's rule it out. About the handguns. Sergeant Gerald Jerry Hill carried a .38 Colt Police Positive. Captain Will Fritz, .38 Colt Army Special. Detective Paul Bentley, .38 Smith & Wesson's Model 15 and 10 snub nose. Well, .38 Special is 9.1 millimeters. Dallas Police Motorcycle Officer Bobby Hargis is carrying a .45 ACP, which is 11.5 millimeters in this photograph. And let us not forget about all the other handguns carried by all the other officers. So 9.1, 11.5 is too big for the throat wound, so let's rule those out. Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Bill Decker. Bill Decker was riding in the lead car in the motorcade carrying a Colt Army 1917 Army 45 ACP, which has a size 11.5. He's also riding in the lead car, so I don't think he turned around and shot at President Kennedy in the throat. So 11.5 is too big for the throat wound, so we're going to rule that one out. How about the Secret Service? Service Agent George Hickey. AR-15 rifle. Colt ArmaLite AR-15 model 01 or 601 with a 20-round magazine is a .22 Remington. It is 5.7 millimeters. It fits a throat wound, but the AR-15 wasn't raised up until after the throat shot, and the car, gun, and agent was behind JFK the whole time in the motorcade. So I'm going to rule that one out too. A key piece of information here for you guys that several researchers have either not known or did not fully research is the .223 Remington round that's been spoken and written about was not even produced until 1964. Nobody had it. So possibly the round that would have been loaded in the AR-15 that Secret Service Agent George Hickey had in his weapon that day was a .222 Remington. But just to be thorough, I've included the ballistics of both cartridges of ammo here in this presentation. On the left, you've got the .222, in the center, the .223, and the right is a .22 Remington Magnum. All these bullets are still 5.7 millimeters, but like I say, he was behind Kennedy. How about Lee Harvey Oswald? Backyard photograph, holding the Mannlicher Carcano with the weapon of the revolver on his hip. And here's a Klein's Western store ad showing the 6.5 Italian carbine. Here we see the Mannlicher Carcano on display. Well, that one there is 6.80 millimeters. We see here in Exhibit 141, FBI Exhibit C8. 6.80 is too big for the throat wound, so we're going to rule that one out too. Oswald's revolver was a 38 caliber Smith & Wesson, 9.1 millimeters. 9.1 is too big for the throat wound, plus Oswald had to pick it up from his boarding house after he left the TSBD, so we're going to rule that one out. See a pattern catching on here? We're ruling out a lot of guns. Jack Ruby. November 24th, 1963, Ruby shoots Oswald. Jack Ruby's revolver, 38 caliber Colt Cobra, 9.1 millimeters. 9.1 is too big for the throat wound, and newly released documents show that Ruby was in fact in Dealey Plaza at the corner of the Postal Annex building across from the TSBD during the assassination, according to informant Bob Vanderslice. 9.1 is too big, so we're going to rule it out. Okay, now that we've got that all cleared up, let's move on. Let us discuss other weapons that we have reports of either being around Dealey Plaza or reported to be seen around or that has been written about in the research documents in the community. Reported 2 different rifles found on the 6th floor of the TSBD. Time between these announcements that follow is 55 minutes. The reported rifle goes from a 30-30 to a British 303 by Tom Whalen, NBC affiliate.
A short time later, Dallas sheriff's officers took a young man into custody. It's believed that they also took a rifle at the same time, described as a 30-30 rifle, which was supposedly found near the scene, although this has not been confirmed.
We returned to station WBAP TV in Fort Worth and newsman Tom Whalen.
Here's an additional report on what you heard NBC correspondent Bob Abernathy describe a few minutes ago, the building in which the sniper had hidden. It's the Texas School Depository at the intersection of Elm and Houston Street in Dallas. Dallas Crime Laboratory Lieutenant J.C. Day went to the building a short time after the shooting took place, and he walked out with a British 303 rifle. The rifle has a telescopic sight. Now, the rifle was found on the 6th floor of the building near a corner window. Also, police searching that area found 3 empty 303 cartridge cases, also scraps of chicken, as if a person could have been there for some time. There were boxes of books, textbooks, and other school materials stacked up all around on 3 sides of a sniper's nest, as if he had been there for some time. There was a gun rest made of papers near the open window that commanded the site from which the sniper, by which the presidential motorcade passed when the president and Governor Connally was shot. As we said before, the sniper's nest has been found, and police have recovered a British 303 rifle with a telescopic sight. This is Tom Whalen reporting from Texas for NBC from WBAP TV.
These are images of a 30-30 rifle. These are not the exact weapons that were there as reported on, because we don't have pictures of a 30-30 round rifle found that this particular type of weapon was never entered into any evidence. We see the 30-30 rifle. Well, guess what? That bullet is 7.8 millimeters. 7.8, too big for the throat wound, so we're going to rule that one out too. These are images of a British 303 rifle. Again, these are not the exact weapons that were there as reported on, because we don't have pictures of a 303 found, and this particular type of weapon was never entered into any evidence. Guess what? The 303 ammunition, 7.92. 7.92 is too big for the throat wound, so we're going to rule it out. Extra tidbit of info. Here you go, Larry. Buell Wesley Frazier owned a 303 British Enfield rifle. After reports of the 303 on TV, Dallas Police Department went looking for Mr. Frazier. The rifle was not the only reason he was wanted for questioning, also his connection to Lee Harvey Oswald, and he too worked at the TSBD.
He was the first patsy in line.
Correct. Supplementary offensive report. This is dated 11/25/63 by Rose and Stovall. And it says, we received information from Mrs. Bill Randall that her brother, Buell Wesley Frazier, 19 at the time, same address, took Lee Harvey Oswald to work on the morning of the murder, and that she saw Oswald put a long package in the back seat of her brother's 1954 black Chevrolet 4-door.
By the way, that's LEMAY Randall. They put Mr. Bill Randall to hide her name, but go ahead.
Okay. They basically talk about in here that let's see, we went, they go looking for Frazier, and they find him at a hospital seeing his father-in-law. Well, they take It says Frazier's sister, Mrs. Randall, came to the location. We brought Frazier and Mrs. Randall to the homicide office. Affidavit was taken from Mrs. Randall. Frazier was interrogated and run on the polygraph with negative results. Affidavit was then taken from Frazier. Frazier and his sister were returned to Irving on 11/22/63. Now, Larry, tell me here, we were just talking about this, and tell us about the report that they tried to have Frazier sign on. I've heard this story too, but tell everybody that's listening.
First of all, the mention of David Williams, his stepfather, you know, is just bizarre because Frazier left Huntsville, Texas, to get away from his stepfather, okay? Because he used to beat him up. He used to beat the crap out of him when he used to get drunk. That's why he ends up at Lenny Mae's house, you know, in Irving, okay? And not only that, Frazier disappears for about 5.5 hours that day. But, you know, going back to your question here, on the night of November 22nd, Captain Fritz tried to make Wesley Frazier sign a confession that he had been involved in some way in the JFK assassination at that time. And this only came out in 2013 when Frazier gave an interview to the 6th-floor museum. Stephen Fagan is the one who did that interview. And it's very surprising where Frazier turned the entire interview around and started to tell the truth. He started to say, you know, how nice Lee was, you know, with kids. You know, he started to create a persona of Lee that was totally counter, contrary to what what had been presented, you know, about Lee Harvey Oswald. But not only that, he said that Lee was not to blame for the assassination, you know, and so many things that he said that day that Stephen Fagan could not avoid. All right, so and one of the things that he said that in that interview was this incident that happened with Captain Fritz, you know, where Fritz, you know, got so mad and red-faced, you know, where he tried to hit him and everything, and then he stormed out of the room, and Frazier obviously did not sign, you know, that confession. So that's the story.
You know, it's just so weird. The whole thing is so weird.
Yeah, to me, it seems like they were trying to make sure they had a backup plan in case they couldn't frame Oswald. They were going to frame Wesley Frazier.
And another tidbit I wanted to mention, you know, that supposed polygraph, you know, that he took that night has never surfaced. Okay,
right,
disappeared. Okay, right. All right. So go ahead.
Okay, so 2 guns in the TSBD prior to November 22nd, 1963, and Roy Truely's later testimony to the Warren Commission, 7H 381 to 382. Mr. Ball asked, do you recall any time you saw any guns in the TSBD building? Mr. Truely, yes, I did, November 20th, 1963. Mr. Truely says they belong to Mr. Warren Castor, a rifle to go deer hunting with, and a .22 rifle.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the mysterious 38 in the brown paper bag real quick. There was a 38 snub-nose revolver found in a brown paper lunch sack. The revolver serial number was 893265. There's been reports of it being found in front of the Texas School Depository Building, the Grassy Knoll, and the corner of Ross and Lamar Street. Reports of a blonde-haired woman dropping it, found by Willie Flatt and turned into Dallas Robbery Homicide Office by DPD Patrolman Jay Raz. The FBI started investigation on 11/30/63. Well, where did the investigation lead to? Where's the revolver now? It's clouded in mystery. We don't have a definitive answer on this. We see here in these Google images of Google Maps, the Texas School Depository Building is only a 6-minute walking distance to North Lamar Street and Ross Avenue, where the gun officially wound up at and was turned into Raz. Let's talk about the 7.65 German Mauser that was reported that they found that as well. It's 7.94 millimeters. In Jim Garrison's On Trail of the Assassinations, page 113 to 115, Officer Seymour Weitzman, part of the Dallas Police Search Team, later described the discovery of the rifle on the afternoon of November 22nd. He stated it had been so well hidden under boxes of books that the officers stumbled over it many times before they found it. I don't know if they were Keystone cops or what, but Officer Weitzman, who had an engineering degree, also operated a sporting goods store, was recognized as an authority on weapons. Consequently, Dallas Homicide Chief Will Fritz, who was on the scene, asked him the make of the rifle, and Weitzman identified it as 7.65 Mauser, a highly accurate German-made weapon, definitely more accurate than the Carcano. Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig was also there and later recalled the word Mauser inscribed in the metal of the gun. Well, you're not going to find Mauser on the Carcano rifle. Deputy Sheriff Eugene Boone executed a sworn affidavit in which he described the rifle as a Mauser. As late as midnight, November 22nd, Dallas District Attorney Henry Wade himself told the media that the weapon found was a Mauser.
You know something, David? I can't help but notice that the first 3 weapons were from 3 different European countries, okay?
Correct.
You're talking about England, Germany, okay, British, Italy, so, what's going on here?
Yeah, definitely, other than the 30-30, well, they didn't have an American-made rifle on scene. So I guess they were pushing that out towards our allies or, out in the Europe area.
Very interesting.
So 7.94 is too big for the throat wound, so we're going to rule that one out. James Files here. James Files, he claims his real name is James Sutton, 21 years old at the time on 11/22. He was a shooter on the grassy knoll, bit the bullet case and set it on the fence. He said that was his trademark. And he says he fired the fatal round into JFK's head. He worked with Charles Nicoletti and Johnny Rosselli, met up with Lee Harvey Oswald and spent time with him in Dallas prior to the assassination. There's more to his story and claims that I'll not go into here, but if you wish, you can look him up on the internet and judge for yourself. He claims his choice of weapon was the Remington XP100. Now, this is a 221 Remington Fireball, and it is 5.7. Well, let's talk about that 5.7. It fits the throat wound, but Files himself said he only shot Kennedy in the head, not the throat. He fired 1 round, hit him in the head. So we're going to rule it out. And finally, we have come to my theory of what type of weapon could have been used. Art imitating life. Let's see if Hollywood in one of its timeless films could point to a weapon that could have been used. James Bond, From Russia with Love, Ian Fleming's film. Where does he get those wonderful toys?
Ask the equipment officer to come in, please. Q Branch has put together a smart-looking piece of luggage for us. We're issuing this to all 00 personnel.
An ordinary black leather case with 20 rounds of ammunition here and here. Now, if you take the top off, you'll find the ammunition inside. On the side here, flat throwing knife. Press that button there, and out she comes. Inside the case, you'll find an AR-7 folding sniper's rifle, .25 caliber, with an infrared telescopic sight.
Excellent stuff here, David.
Thank you, Larry. From Russia with Love was released October 10th and 11th in 1963 in London and United Kingdom. It wasn't released in the United States until April 8th, 1964. So what would have been like if the shooter that used this or could have used this weapon was sitting there in the theater going, holy shit, that looks familiar.
Not with that arm, you won't. You'd better leave it to me.
I'm already too much in your debt.
How can a friend be in debt? Here.
Infrared lens. Do you notice anything?
Not yet.
She has a lovely mouth, that Anita.
Yes, I see what you mean.
Harm or no harm, I have to pull that trigger.
You think you can? You've got one shot, remember?
It'll have to do.
So a reason for the use in the movie, an assassination. Well, let's talk about the rifle I think was used, the AR-5 and the AR-7. The ArmaLite AR-5 was produced and put into use in 1956 by the United States Air Force. They actually had what was known as an ArmaLite AR-5 and an ArmaLite AR-5A. The AR-5A is the one that was actually adopted in. It was released for civilian use in 1959. It weighed 2.5 pounds. The length of the stock was 28 inches, barrel length 14. You've got a gun length of 42 inches. And here is the bolt action of the receiver. And we see the clip assembled in. They actually used to call this the Ronson clip or the Zippo magazine clip because the 5-round capacity magazine was just about the size of a Ronson Zippo. The 22 Hornet round, which is what's chambered for the AR-5, is 2.3 times the muzzle velocity and 7 times the energy of the common 22 long rifle. This is a supersonic bullet. It's got a ballistic tip, like a polymer tip to it. And I've got one here in my hands. You can actually remove the tip of the bullet, and it goes down about 3/8 of an inch. If you wanted to tip the bullet, say with mercury or a poison, you could easily do it by removing it and then just putting a wax seal back on the bullet.
Jim, you were asking about this the other night, precisely about the tip there.
Yeah, yeah.
And as far as size comparison goes, this is your 22 long rifle, okay? This is your 22 Hornet round. There's only approximately about maybe 3/4 of an inch longer, but you've got 2.3 times muzzle velocity and 7 times the energy of this little guy right here. We see size comparison here. It was designed in the 1920s, produced 1930 to present. You can still get the 22 Hornet round. There's other rifles out there besides the AR-5 that will fire this ammunition. If you want to buy an AR-5 today, you got to find a gun broker that can locate one, and they're ranging about between $2,500 and $3,000 for that rifle. It's manufactured by Winchester and used by the United States Air Force in World War II. Specifications: 5.7 millimeters. 35 grain round, which is your VMAX round like this, is 3,060 feet per second, 728 foot-pounds. More than enough to go through the windshield and cause the wound in the throat of President Kennedy. So 5.7 millimeter fits the throat wound, so let's rule it in. Now we're going to see the ArmaLite AR-7, which is the standard 22 round. It was produced and used in 1959 to present. It weighs 2.49 pounds, barrel length 14 inches, total length, it's actually 35. I made a mistake. I'm saying it's 28. Original, it was 5-round capacity. Now you can put 8 rounds in this gun. We see the 22 long rifle size here. That's also 5.7, but if you look at velocity, it's only 1,200 feet per second and 104 foot-pounds. So I don't think it was the AR-7 rifle. I believe it was the AR-5 that was actually used. 5.7 millimeter for the AR-7 fits the throat wound, so we're going to rule that in as well. Henry Survival now makes the rifle. It's made from the design of the ArmaLite AR-7 and the AR-5. Weight is 3.5 pounds. I measured it, and the total length of it is actually 35 inches. This is completely broken down, and we're gonna put that together. Pull off your buttstock.
You know.
There's your magazine. This is your action. Your action goes down and slides in. There's a set screw right here that puts this together.
Looks like a toy.
Yeah, exactly.
A James Bond toy.
Yeah, really.
And then here's your barrel. It just slides down, and then you've got a spin collar. So the total length of the rifle is 35 inches. It's easily put together. You can take it apart. You can, well, you can ask Larry. I walked up on the stage.
Yeah.
And I had it in my sport coat, and I took it out and put it down by the podium, and then I gave everybody a little disclaimer. I was going to show it, and I asked him. I said, I walked out in the middle. I said, do you see anything, weird that I have any bulges on me? And I said, do you see a rifle anywhere on my person? And of course, nobody could see it. Well, I reached in my coat, I pulled it out, put it together, and those are the pictures that Larry showed last week and also on his blog. And when people saw it go together, they were just completely blown away on how easily it was to conceal.
Yeah, if they were going to put anything under your armpit like Lee was supposed to do.
Yeah, that would have been the rifle, right?
Yeah, this would have been a so much easier deal than
yeah, I know, yeah.
5 Carcano rifle. And here's a picture of when you buy a Henry Survival rifle today. You can get these at any place, Bass Pro, Academy Sports, damn near anywhere. You can order them online. They're $249.99 for this particular rifle. 2 magazines, the barrel, and the action and the stock all come together. And here's a good one for you. If you drop it while you're hiking, the damn thing floats.
Yeah.
Now we were talking about a scope on the rifle. This here's a picture of the scope mounted on top of the rifle. You can order the adapter online for $24.99 that has the threads on it, so you can put an actual suppressor on it. The AR-5, AR-7 both could have been used. The AR-5 is the rifle that I lean towards because the .22 Hornet is a more powerful round. Okay, so why? Well, it has very little recoil. It's easy to conceal rifle. It's extremely accurate to 100 meters. For such a small caliber, it can cause a lot of damage. And guess what? It's quiet. It sounds like a firecracker.
Dave, now that you mentioned the 100 meters, I recall that Brian did that in his presentation. He was talking about the periphery, the circumference, and how that precise measure, that 100 meters, came into play from the back to the front, the side, and everything, which would have been, the ideal distance for an ambush for a sniper.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, Larry.
What do we estimate the distance from the inside the triple underpass to the
about 90 yards, 90 meters, something like that, Jim?
Yeah, well within the range. On Larry's aspect of putting the shooter in the cubby hole, or where I'll show you where I've got my shooter location, which is right above Larry's, they're well within that 100-meter range.
Yes, yes.
This sound here is actually what a firecracker sounds like. We've all heard them before. And this is the sound of an AR-5, AR-7 round. The sound comparison between firecracker and AR-7, it's 0.07 decibels difference.
Wow.
I put it on a spectrograph on the audio from a firecracker to the AR-7 round, and you've got 0.07, less than a tenth of a decibel.
Yeah, you can't tell the difference.
You can't tell the difference. I mean, by shooting this rifle, this coincides with what people heard, saying they heard a firecracker. It does not sound like a firecracker, the 6.5 round. So now let's look at the possible shooting locations and the trajectories for just a moment. First off, I think it was a frontal shot, obviously. That's what everybody is stating, the fact that they saw in the throat wound, the doctors at Parkland. The eyewitnesses say that they saw a hole in the windshield from the front. This is an aerial photo, and the red rectangle represents where the presidential limo was at the time of the shot to President Kennedy's throat. If JFK was sitting in his car, this is the viewpoint of what he would have had. A South Knoll shooter. Sherry Feaster, the author of Enemy of the Truth, stated that she thought the head wound came from the front South Knoll location. And she puts a throat shot trajectory of 15 degrees in the same location that I just showed what JFK would have seen at his view in Dealey Plaza on Elm Street. And if it came from the South Grassy Knoll, this would explain the hole in the windshield and the shot to JFK's throat. But I don't think the throat wound came from the South Knoll. Sniper's viewpoint from the South Knoll. We see here in these three pictures actually. So where do I put a shooter? Look at the bridge. This is the Tom Dillard photograph. And every time that we actually see the photograph in print, we usually see, I hope you can see my mouse pointer here, but the middle tail light up is usually cropped out of a lot of the photographs that we saw printed at that time. Well, when you look at the bridge, and I don't know if you guys can see it yet, but let's take a look at the next photograph. This photograph was cleaned up just a little bit, other than just taking the grain out of it. Now what do you see? How about now?
Somebody's crouching there.
Tactical shooting position, or what I like to call I bent down to tie my shoe position. Well, let's take a look from the shooter's perspective. These were taken just last year. If you're standing in that exact location and you're standing straight up in the air, straight up and down, and you're looking, and just so happens there was a car in the right location when I took the photograph. Just about the location, a little bit farther back there. And if you're crouched down between the two concrete pillars, this is your viewpoint. And just for giggles, I went ahead and put a scope on it. If they were using a scope, this would be a perfect viewpoint. It lines up perfectly with the windshield to go right into JFK's throat. And here's an extra tidbit of information for you to ponder. Do you know who had a government-issued AR-5 issued to him and did not return it when his service ended? This blew Larry away, and Jim, yours and Gary's reaction to this was priceless last week. General Curtis LeMay. And in this photograph, we actually see that this AR-5 belonged to General Curtis LeMay. It's even got his signature on it in his handwriting, and that little nameplate that's actually attached to the AR-5 rifle. And we see it here more up close.
Well, you know, it appears to have been an Air Force expert by the name of Jack Lawrence who fired this round. So since he was Air Force, that LeMay would have given him his gun, he would have wanted to do it. He hated JFK. But I think Larry's location inside the triple underpass is superior to up on the top, because it would have been just too conspicuous. Inside there, you got the perfect place to put it in this.
Too many railroad men.
Yeah, it's just too public. It's
Yeah, that's where Doug Weldon.
I like the weapon. Now, I think you haven't quite finished, David, so I want you to finish. And I got a couple of comments.
Okay. Well, when me and Larry sat down at Oldie and we were discussing this, and he showed me what he had in chapter 17 in the book, which, you know, completely blew me away. I'm sitting there going, this is great. This, you know, we're working in the same area.
Right.
And what I was talking to Larry about, I said, well, what if we had a person, what if the shooter was down in the cubbyhole and we had a radio guy with a walkie-talkie up on the bridge, or vice versa? I said, you've got something definitely, you know, conspicuous there in the Dillard photo. And I really like Larry's work with putting the shooter in the cubbyhole. I said, so what if they were working together, perhaps?
That makes sense.
Well, see, if you got an Air Force shooter and he's concerned about the chain of command using the weapon given to him by the Chief of Staff of the Air Force is going to, you know, reassure him that what he's doing is what he ought to be doing in relation to his responsibilities as a member of the U.S. military.
Also the position on atop the triple overpass is also the Doug Weldon position, Jim, that you publish in Murder in Dealey Plaza.
Well, I think you nailed the location, Gary, and I think that David has almost certainly nailed the weapon. In fact, I think it fits very nicely. I would observe Jim Lewis has been going through the South and firing high velocity rounds through junk cars, and he finds that it makes this small white spiral nebula with a dark hole at the center. And at the beginning, of course, you show the cracked windshield, which was a substitute by the Secret Service. The original was taken back to Ford and replaced. Doug Weldon determined from discussion with the official who had it replaced, it had that through and through hole in it. That was a third windshield because Ford put a brand new one on, but the Secret Service had a whole bunch. Bob Livingston discovered that they'd obtained 20. They claimed for target practice, but it was obviously to set up, you know, the fraudulent deception we have here. Oh, what Jim Lewis discovered is when it passes through the windshield, it makes the sound of a firecracker. So you have, potentially two sources of sounds of firecracker, namely from the weapon itself and when the bullet passes through the windshield. I'm wondering whether that strong round wouldn't have gone completely through JFK's neck.
Well, I was going to comment on that. First of all, I think that the discovery here, the presentation by David, especially revealing the high velocity capabilities.
Stop share, David. Stop share.
Okay.
The high velocity capabilities of this type of weapon, okay, and the fact that this lower
completely share. Stop share, David, because I want to get us all four here.
Yeah,
sure. Do I hit the new share or do I hit
stop share at the top.
Okay.
Just stop share at the top.
Right. The fact that this is a small caliber bullet that is not really intended to go through, penetrate and go through an object more so than to tumble inside, the target. Okay. And
plus the windshield had to take a lot out of it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But still it is high enough of velocity and powerful enough to go through that and do the damage that it did. I think David might want to comment on that.
Yeah, I tell you what, I've talked to several ammunition manufacturers. I've talked to several people in law enforcement, and the consensus is the number one ammunition you do not want to get shot with is a 22 round, whether it's a 22 long rifle or a 22 Hornet round. And the reason for that is because when a 22 rifle round, whether it's the Hornet or the long rifle, or even a 22 Magnum, anything that's 22, the speed that bullet is moving, when it enters the body, 99% of the time, what it does is it enters the body, it starts a ricochet effect and starts hitting, tendons, bones, soft tissue. A lot of people that get shot with a 22, if they're out squirrel hunting or hunting with rabbits and somebody ends up shooting with a 22, I've talked to nurses and also doctors as well. Matter of fact, I even asked McClellan about this. I said, if you got shot with a 22, I said, will that bullet leave your body? He goes, well, you'll actually have to go in and dig to get it out. Well, I got to piecing this together. I said, well, why do we have such a wide gash in the throat wound instead of a perfectly round hole that has been enlarged to put the trach tube in?
Yes.
They went in and tore that gash in his throat to dig that damn bullet out, is what I think. And I think that coincides with the 22 round bouncing around in there. They didn't just reach in with a pair of forceps and pull out the round. What they did is they had to go down there and fish for it to find out where it went to.
Now, Bob Livingston, who is a world authority on the human brain and also an expert on wound ballistics, having supervised an emergency medical hospital for injured Okinawans and Japanese prisoners of war during the Battle of Okinawa, told me he believed the bullet had entered the throat and had fragmented, and a part had gone up and ruptured this tough membrane that covers the cerebellum called the tentorium, and another had gone down into the lung. And we know we have the bruises. It's the right lung, as I recall, that is bruised from efforts to retract the portion of the bullet there. And I'm just wondering if there's anything in your research that would suggest that account by this guy would be consistent with the weapon and the bullet you're talking about.
Well, I tell you what, I feel that's definitely consistent because when the 22 round goes in, it is known to fragment, and a solid piece. I'm not saying the 22 Hornet's a magic bullet by any means. I don't think it went in and came out in pristine condition. I think between going through the windshield, going into his throat, I feel that it definitely could have fragmented, and that could explain why they went in and pulled pieces out.
The enlarged throat wound appears to have originated as follows. Bob Livingston, who actually was a scientific director for two of the National Institutes of Health located across the street from Bethesda Naval Hospital, actually had heard the description of the wound on radio of a small clean puncture wound. He knew it was a wound of entry. So he called over and was put into contact with James Humes. And Hume said he wasn't listening to the radio because he didn't want to be affected by any reports. But Bob explained how that this had been a wound of entry and therefore the neck had to be carefully dissected. They were cut off by the FBI. He thought it was very odd.
Right.
Humes would that evening later ask him what it would have looked like if it had been a wound of exit instead of a wound of entry, and Bob described it. I believe that Humes used Bob's description to reconstruct the wound to try to make it look like a wound of exit. But that Bob's analysis, which I believe is confirmed by your own observations, is the bullet entered cleanly and then fragmented, and part went up to rupture the tentorium, because he explained to me that even the near simultaneous of two shots, say from the back of the head and from the side, and now it may have been two from the left and the right temples, actually, that occurred, because David Mantic is now inclined to believe there was this third shot to the head, which was fired from the south knoll, where both Rick Russo and Ed Tatro have photographs of that knoll shooter, separate photographs. So I've now seen two with the rifle. I believe that this is now consistent and puts all the pieces together, that it's inside the triple underpass from which the shot was fired, and that you therefore had two sources of the sound of a firecracker, one from the weapon itself, which, as you said, makes the sound of a firecracker, and the other is a bullet passing the windshield, which makes its own sound of a firecracker. I think all this hangs together terribly well, and of course, the sound proximity would have been very close. I mean, this is a high velocity round, or a boom, you know. The firecracker sound would have been almost, better than an echo. I mean, it would have been almost overlapping.
Right, absolutely, Jim. And I tell you what, I gave this presentation in Dallas last year, and Dr. David Mantic was actually sitting in the audience, and he immediately just started. He had a ton of questions for me, and we sat down and talked about it. And he said, "I've never seen that rifle before," and he said, "But the way that your presentation puts it out there," he said, I think you've got something here." And Ed Tatro himself, I saw Ed down there in Olney, and Ed was completely blown away too, and I'm sitting there going, well, I think I might finally have something here. So,
well, what I like too is that this would be Curtis LeMay's own weapon. You see, which would have given this guy was an enlisted man. He just happened to be the best shot in the Air Force. Confidence that what he was doing was consistent with his obligations in the chain of command. I mean, he'd gone to work for the automobile dealership that provided all these different makes and models for the motorcade, which was completely anomalous. They're all uniformly black Cadillacs typically, so the perps would know where everyone was. He only went to work a couple days before. After the shooting, he returned to the dealership all muddy because he made his escape through the sewer system, nauseated, went into vomiting over what he'd done. So, I mean, I think this all hangs together. And then, of course, he would disappear. But I also like it, in relation to what Jim Lewis said. The only fault I would give of your presentation is in the beginning, it's disconcerting. You have the legitimate Alchins. I've got many places where I compare the Alchins, where you can see a close-up, that it's a small white spiral nebula with a dark hole in the center. It's where JFK's left ear would be if his left ear were visible, juxtaposed with the Secret Service. That's already an assassination sign. It's clearly not the same. I have much more about it actually in the Great Zapruder film hoax. Because I have Jim Lewis's photograph of one of the vehicles he fired through to see if he could hit a dummy in the back seat. But David, this is excellent work. Excellent work.
I think that I think one of the main strengths of David's presentation is the way that he has eliminated all the possibilities, of the rifle in the board.
Well, it was the following flaw. He talked about the fireball, and you said you eliminate it because Miles said he only fired it from there, but it could have been a second fireball fired from another location. So
I'm talking about logic.
The others, based on the size of the wound, were of course more effective. But I thought it was excellent the way you went through the multiple weapons and compared the size of the rounds and all that, David. That was excellent.
Dr. Fetzer, and that would be right up your alley, using logic, to narrow this down.
This is called argument by elimination. What are all the alternatives, A or B or C or D, and not A and not B and not C and not D and so forth. It was very good. It had a very nice logical structure. But you ought not to be using the cracked windshield, which is a fake by the Secret Service, without explaining that this was a substitute done by the Secret Service. You did say, and cited the witnesses who reported it wasn't cracked. It was a clear, clean bullet hole. but you should have had a close-up of the from the Altions, because you can actually see it. I've blown it up and I've used it.
Well, there are pictures of the limo at Parkland that show what you're talking about, Jim, and also the recordings of the JFK Horsemen, Officer Freeman and Officer Stavis Ellis. You know, where they clearly said it was a whole event.
Yeah.
It was nice and neat.
No, I know. I'm just saying visually, David's presentation, when he shows the Secret Service limousine, which is a fake, and isn't identifying it concurrently as a fake, that is disconcerting to those who know the difference. That's all. This is a matter of the sequence of presentation and a note, as it were, about what you're doing. But I thought it was excellent, David. It's, I've seen a lot of presentations. This was certainly one of the better, I think, from of JFK of recent time. I'm very ecstatic, very pleased to see there are persons of your degree of competence pursuing these issues. This is, to me, a very positive development.
Yeah, we need all the help we can get in the truther community, no doubt. And you've been our honorary guy tonight. So we're going to go ahead and call it. If anybody has anything left to say.
Well done.
Well, good job, David. And we hope to have you on again real soon. This was JFK number 234. Just another day on JFK.
Another day at the office.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it.